Welcome everybody to Career Conversations, Inclusivity in the Workplace. I'm Maddie. I'm from NAACP, specifically representing our Community Service Committee. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm just super excited about this chat.
Hey everyone, my name is Morgan Wiley. I am a senior and I study medicine, health, and society. I am representing Mosaic this evening, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm really excited to be connecting with you all this evening and with our panelists. So with that, I'm gonna ask that our panelists tell us a little bit about yourselves, introduce yourselves, your name, your graduation year, major, and your current position and title in your company. I'm going to start with, I see Somto first on my screen, so I'll pass the mic to Somto.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Somto. I'm graduated 2019 with chemical engineering major, currently working at Bain & Company in Houston, Texas as an associate consultant. So that's pretty much me. Was there anything else? Did I miss something? Okay, I think that was it. So I'll pass on to the next person then.
I think that was it. Oh, if you could also tell us your pronouns, please.
Oh, yes. She, her, and hers.
Thank you. I see Tommy next, so.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tommy Oswald, pronouns he, him, his. I graduated this past year in 2020, and I'm currently working as an HR analyst for the Global Diversity and Talent Management team at Citibank.
Thank you, Tommy. And lastly, but certainly not least, Maxine.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Maxine Spencer. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and they, and theirs. And I am the More to Me program specialist here in town at the Oasis Center. And I graduated with a BA in philosophy back in 2018, just so long ago.
Thank you all for those introductions. And I'll pass the mic to Maddie to get us started with questions.
All righty, thank you. So for our first question, we would like to know, in your experience, what are the challenges faced by members of historically underrepresented groups in your workplace? So that's going to be the first part. And then the second one, what strategies have you personally used to address these challenges, and how successful were those strategies? A little twofold thing there for you. Feel free, whichever one of you guys wants to take it first. All right, Maxine, since you graduated first out of the group, it's gonna be you.
Okay. When it comes to things that I'm seeing for historically marginalized groups in the workplace, I think one of the things that comes to my mind first is imposter syndrome. I think in my own kind of experience, once I started working in my position, and I've been in this position ever since I graduated, it was more so kind of the belief that, wow, I was able to like be in this kind of position. You know, I'd get people telling me, it's just like, normally people like, when you're at this kind of level, you kind of like intern and you work your way up, but you just kind of came in. And to me, that was like, oh, how am I really worthy of that kind of like recognition or kind of like understanding of that? But then for me, it also became, well, they wouldn't have hired me if they did not feel I was competent, and if they didn't feel like they could either A, help me grow and become the professional that I want to be, but then also B, know that I can succeed in this current position and with my current tasks and goals. It's been something I've seen, like even with like older professionals, and so kind of like professionals that are in like their late 30s, early 40s, and you know, they come to like higher positions of power in like the agency, and it's still like, am I still like really worthy of this? And I think that's just something that, you know, even though I feel comfortable now, you know, maybe in the future I might feel that again, but still always kind of reaffirming to myself, you know, the power of my own skills and the power of my own of my intellect. And, you know, I've made it this far. I've made it this far for a reason. And then also I think about specific identities when it comes to like being trans. And specifically when it comes to healthcare, you know, not everybody, is your healthcare plan sort of guaranteed to like help you in what you need, help you get what you need. And that's not necessarily if you want to medically transition in that sort of aspect, but even if you're trying to look for just kind of like mental health services at the very least. I mean, not saying that like everyone who is trans has to have that, but I mean, when you're the only one in the workplace, that's very alienating. And then the questions become, like you have to educate everybody. And then everyone starts to, you have to have this defined boundary of like, okay, these are questions you just cannot ask me. Like you are my coworker. And yes, I, as an individual, might feel comfortable telling you some things, but you can't ask me all of my medical history just because I'm trans and I'm just because I'm in the workplace. It's like, that's just not something that is something that you can do. And so being able to kind of like advocate for yourself, especially if your workplace hasn't necessarily enumerated protections when it comes to gender identity and expression yet, and then also really trying to make sure that the health benefits that you get are what you need, like going from physical needs to mental needs, which is something that all of us would need. But still, if in your case you are trying to actually access like medical transitionary services, you need to check that out and you have to do a full kind of like analysis of what those benefits are. So that's just immediately what comes to my mind.
I think for me, one challenge that comes to mind for historically underrepresented groups is not always seeing yourself represented in the company or knowing like where to go to find community. And especially in industries such as the financial services industry, it doesn't really have the history of being the most inclusive space for individuals from marginalized backgrounds. So I think one way that I've kind of helped navigate that, and one thing that a lot of companies do offer are employee resource groups. So for example, at Citi, they have a lot of employee resource groups that are based around identity. And that's usually a good way to kind of get started out in like finding a community based on an identity that you hold. So for example, like I identify as a bisexual Latino man. And so I can go to the Pride employee resource group that we have at Citi, or the like Hispanic Latino resource group. And you're able to find a lot of like localized network chapters of people with that same identity that you can connect with and get to know better. And so I think that that's one aspect of it. But yeah.
Yeah, I think I just echo what Tommy and Maxine said. Imposter syndrome is real, and I think it's quite interesting because it's always like underneath the surface, and then you're like, I'm good, like I got this, I'm confident, and then you have faced another challenge, and it just takes you back a second to remember again that I got this and I can do this. So it's definitely something to be aware of in general, and I really love what you said, Maxine, about just remembering that the people who hired you for a reason, and then we all bring our own special like sauce to the table. And also with the affinity groups, we definitely have that too at Bain, and it's something that's really big as far as just finding community. The one other thing that I think is a challenge for historically underrepresented groups is the fact that because you don't have that representation, usually like in like higher tiers of leadership, it's I think a bit harder for people to see your potential. In the sense that a lot of the times, like it's like, oh, like what have you done? I think we've all heard about the idea of being given the benefit of the doubt versus not. And I think in general, there's a sense of, oh, and this is not for being specific, it's just in general, like it's like, oh, like what have you done to prove yourself to be in this space? And so you're almost battling with yourself, and you look around and you figure out that like, oh, people here don't even believe in me too. So what am I going to do? And I think it's I want to say I've gone through different phases, and I think I'm a phase where I like literally step in and create the culture that I want to see. And it's small things, right? It's like, where you go to, especially if you're like from a historically underrepresented group, and you're also probably from a low financial background, you just like it's a whole new world, whether it's the dinners you're going to, or type of activities, or the types of songs, and you're like, I just don't vibe that way. But then at the same time, you figure out that people who are there, like that is what they're most comfortable in. So just figuring out the ways to bring up those conversations, and honestly just challenge people and say, hey, like, I'd actually rather we did this. What are your thoughts? And I think for any or firm that is inclusive and that people actually want to learn about the other person, they'll be very open to trying something new and just honestly like taking a stab in there and saying, no, this is actually what I would like us to do. And so let's try something different for a change. And I think that's my general tactic right now. Just, ask people directly.
Thank you all so much for that insight. It is reassuring to know that despite imposter syndrome, you can still tap into that self-confidence and create the kind of workplace culture that you want to see, like Somto just mentioned. So for our next question, have you guys ever felt the need to change your physical and/or communication styles to fit into your workplace culture? For example, have you felt the need to change your hair, your dress, or code switch, things like that?
I'm fine to go first again on this one. I feel like I can be a little bit shorter. I mean, for me, being in the nonprofit sector, there's kind of the assumption that there's still a lot more freedom. But even within our own sphere, I myself have many instances where I find myself very, very kind of, at least to me, very explicitly code switching when it comes to specific meetings, when it comes to meeting with different people. Even though it's folks that I have a good relationship with, there is still that, I have to have this certain persona. I have to have this certain way of being. And so I have to just be this certain way. Even though sometimes I get into a conversation with different community partners, folks of that nature, and then they just drop down the whole barrier. And it's just kind of like, we're just kikiing a little bit, it's still, we're getting the work done and we're being productive, but still I have to really still train myself and saying that like, I'm feeling this because of just how it is to be observed as a professional in our workplace. I have to kind of like take an extra step and say, okay, they're trying to kiki with me, and also still being professional. That's something that can happen. These two things can exist at the same time. And so, especially as I first started out, it was so difficult to really admit it and to really get into that, because I would get with people who are, leaders of an organization, and they're like just shooting stuff, and everything. And I just have to kind of like, I'm just kind of like trying to be all primped and proper, but then they're just shooting it all at me. And I'm like, and after a while, I'm like, okay, you know what? I can do this with you. And I can understand this as kind of like a boundary that I have with you that I can do. And, if I feel a certain way, I feel like I have to manage myself when it comes to other people, then I will do so. And I will do what makes me feel most comfortable in the workplace, knowing that there is still this kind of unspoken expectation of professionalism that I will kind of like, I'll both try to challenge, but then also try to just do what I feel like is best for me moving forward as a young professional, which is just still very difficult to come to terms with. And then really for dress and for hair, I mean, I've had bosses that have had dyed hair, I've had all sorts of like folks like with different hairstyles. And so when it comes to like what we've talked about, I haven't really had that kind of experience where I really have to feel like I have to manage everything. That's more so when I talk about work with my parents, who are definitely from an older generation, and they're like, okay, do this, and this. But then I tell them, hey, this workplace isn't necessarily like that. Things can be different. And I recognize that is what your experience might have been, or what you might decide to do. But in this workplace, and how I want to be in a workplace moving forward, I want to be in a workplace that I can still be my full self. And if that includes my locks, that includes my locks. I want to try to still dress in like a certain way, that's like this little bun down and everything. It's cute. And that's not required, but this is what makes me feel like me, and that's what I will do.
I can go next, I guess. That's a really interesting question, and I think there's a lot of different ways to cut it, right? I completely agree with what Maxine said. I think in order to think about corporate America in general, like if that's the space that you're in, you have to realize that there is a certain predominant culture, right? And even if the space isn't conducive or isn't like, how do I put this? even if it feels like the space doesn't permit the expression of self, like say for instance, for me, like I've done all different types of hairstyles at work, like Afro ranging to like this. There's actually a period where I was like, I'm not doing any extensions. I'm just going to carry my regular hair and like, let me see if anybody would say anything about it. And it's not because anybody said that wasn't okay, but it's the fact that I look around and maybe there are not as many people wearing that. And so I'm like, is that okay? and I think in a lot of these issues, just figuring out the balance between the external sort of like locus of control and the internal side. And I think even if it is permitted, there's eternal like, are you sure? And then because we all know that even if like it is permitted, there are a lot of people with a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different like ideas of what is professional, quote unquote, which like there's a whole different discussion of like, let us dissect what professional is, right? Because I don't think it's currently defined properly. And I think it's just figuring out, again, like what boundaries you're willing to push. For me, like I was just like, this is what I'm going to do. And I think I've taken a more like daring perspective. And I've realized that like, there's nothing I have done that has been frowned upon. So technically speaking, it isn't wrong. It's just the fact that because it's not prevalent in the environment that I'm in, it feels like it's different because I'm like one of three or one of the only person that's like wearing an afro when everybody else hair down. And then obviously there's also the questions because a lot of people didn't grow up around like Black people or Black women, and it's just the idea of like, oh hey, like how does that work? And I'm generally like fine answering those questions. Like I actually welcome them because I'm like, I'd rather like you learn today than like later on. But yeah, I think just figuring out what those boundaries are for you and then understanding like how to like stretch them. But I will definitely encourage everyone to, a lot of the times, like one of my friends has this quote, it's like, it's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. And like, I don't think we should be asking for permission to be ourselves. I think if the organization says no, then you either question why you're at that organization or you say, okay, I'm sorry. And I think the former though.
I think that's such a good point, like what you just said right there. And I think also to Maxine's point about kind of how like parents might have a different sense of what professionalism means. I think for me, like I remember when I first got this job, my dad's like, okay, we need to like get you some suits. We need to make sure, when you start going to work, like make sure you're clean shaven, like you don't need to have like facial hair when you go to work, all this kind of stuff. And then I think also in addition to that, my background was not in corporate America or in financial services at all. Like before working at Citi, I worked in the music industry doing radio hosting, which is very different than what I'm doing now. But also the idea of professionalism was very different as well. Like I could come in with a t-shirt and jeans and that was very normal. Fortunately, in a sense, I started work virtually, which helped. At least I could still wear jeans when I go to work. But I also thought, let me err on the side of caution and wear more quote unquote professional clothing. So like I wore button downs a lot at first. I did a lot. I did go clean shaven for a bit, thinking that, that was kind of what I should do. However, as I kind of got more acclimated to my team and my work environment, I learned that was not that wasn't an expectation that my team or the people I interacted at Citi had, but is one that I had kind of placed on myself based on what other people told me and what kind of like these media representations were. And so I think kind of as I progressed, I slowly went back towards my own style, which is a little bit more relaxed and comfortable. And I also learned that, as Sumto said, like, you shouldn't have to like ask to be yourself at work. You should bring your whole self to work. And if that doesn't match with your company, then that might be, an inflection point for you in your career and realizing that, maybe you need to go somewhere where you can be your full self. So, yeah.
And if I could add one thing to what Tommy just said, it's the idea that, honestly, I believe that as time goes on, like work from home has definitely accelerated that, but the definition of professionalism is going to change even more, right? Like it's like, because even if you go to Silicon Valley, like it's completely different. Like the Bay Area, it's very just like chill. And even there was this movement recently on LinkedIn, right? The whole idea of like, right now people aren't all like made up and everything. Like it's just, come as you are. And so I do think that's going to evolve. And I think part of what's going to help that evolution is each person taking a stake and saying, this is who I am and this is what I'm bringing to the workplace, because it isn't really a monolith, and like we all kind of know that. But I think there's the need to conform that's already like very prevalent, and so but the more we all conform, the more nothing's going to change, and it just like continues with like a cycle. So, but yeah.
And even with that point, I think even quote unquote post-COVID, when people do start going to the office more, I think this time at home and like people actually like breaking down some of these ideas of what it means to be professional, I think will hopefully carry over into the workplace after COVID. I mean, if you're working in investment banking, you may still have to wear a suit, but the ideas around that I think are shifting.
Very true. I appreciate all you guys for providing thoughtful insight on that. Some big takeaways there. Keep breaking down barriers. To continue our conversation, the next question we have for you guys is, how do you know if a company truly values you and isn't just hiring you because of the box you check? And then also to that point, what strategies or questions have you used to help determine this?
Okay, I guess I'll start on this one. I think for me, that's a tough question that I always think about internally, because working for a for-profit company, there's always like two sides to how the company tends to think about things. There's the part that's like, oh, we should do this because it's good for profits. And then there's the other side that's like, oh, we should do this because it's the right thing to do, and it's putting people over profits and like really centering the employee experience. Ideally, they're one and the same. However, that's not always the case. But I think for me, how I kind of navigated it in my own career search process was reaching out and networking with people at Citi who had similar identities as me, and really ask them candid questions about what their experience was like in the workplace. If they were out in the workplace, what that was like. If they weren't out, why that was. If they were, of a Hispanic or Latino background, like what was it like? They're like working at a global company like Citi. A lot of times you do work with people that speak other languages or from different cultures. So how that experience was like as well. And I think that process of asking those candid questions during my networking sessions, I think really helped at least illuminate to me if the culture at Citi was one that valued doing the right thing and putting people first.
I guess I can go next. So would echo exactly what Tommy said, and I think definitely talking to people who are there to understand the actual experiences, and just making sure that it feels, I think we do have a gut feeling about these things, right? Like, you go for a company event and you go for something else, and you feel if you're welcome or not. You feel how much intention and how much genuine effort someone is putting into knowing you. Like even on campus, like there are different groups of people, and just you're like, I know you don't really want to know me, and like it's like that happens too, like in the workplace. And I do think it's important to recognize, and someone gave me this like mini talk when I was looking into business schools too. It's like everywhere you go, there are going to be good people and there are going to be people who aren't as good, and like there are going to be people who respect you and people who like value you, and there are going to be people who don't. And so the question is like, how is that ratio, right, in your company? And like, what is the leadership policy? Like, are they more, we need to make sure that this space is as inclusive as possible? Or is it more like, oh, like, let's just get the diverse numbers in and check the box? And some of the ways that you can ask those questions are like, because culture has to be intentional, right? So it's like in the actual daily process, how do we make sure that people are being included? How do we make sure that decision-making processes reflect not just like one specific demographics thoughts? Like, how do we make sure that promotion criteria isn't limited to just people who think a certain way or look a certain way? And so I think those are the kind of questions that we should ask when we are thinking about like the recruiting process, and even when you get in there. And I think the most important thing is honestly going with an organization that is nimble and an organization that will change, because a lot of people are starting from different starting points, and like just knowing and having the confidence that if you say, hey, you know, something is wrong, like, you know, like, I don't like how this is going, like, do you feel like someone will listen to you and something will actually change? Or do you feel like saying, like, oh, nah, we've been doing this like this for 400 years, and it's going to remain the same? Like, so it's just making sure that it's a community and an organization that's like willing to change. And I think a lot of that is talking to, like Kami said, people who are already there and asking them, you know, when have you felt like you overstepped, but in a way that wasn't because of your work? Or like, when have you felt like somebody didn't give you the space to be you? And like, what would you do about changing that? And ask if people are even receptive to that sort of change. And also talking to leadership too, people who aren't actually like Latino or Black or in any way different, and just asking them, what do you think about diversity and inclusion? How have you been involved in that? And just trying to get the lay of the land, I think.
I think to kind of echo what's already been said, workplace culture is huge factor in this. Although my mind immediately does go to like what enumerated protections are already kind of like written out and like the handbook and everything, but also I would like to like really question, you know, for this particular like agency, you know, how did we come to this particular statement? You know, was there a full process? Was there trainings? Did we have a full conversation about this in the workplace? Because as way back when, my current agency, we started working to be an open and affirming agency. And so really being able to try to at least talk about and do trainings around LGBTQ plus folks. And so, you know, we had a whole process that my supervisor led, and it was like a whole ordeal. Like it became part of the workplace culture. And how we are right now is we have an anti-racism committee that I'm a part of. And what we're trying to do again is be very intentional and have lots of discussions, lots of work, lots of action being done specifically around this. And to not just kind of, you know, this is something we say, but something that we want to actively contribute to. And then I also kind of think about, especially, I think this is really, it might be, I don't know, I just think really if you can have different like very candid conversations with folks and really talk about how they view leadership, and particularly like leadership, like folks of color in specific leadership positions. And so are we kind of viewing leaders of color as in kind of like a tokenistic kind of way, as like, okay, we have a Black person here, we have like this Latinx person here. So, you know, it's kind of like, oh yeah, we have this kind of like we're representative, you know, of the people that we're trying to serve, which is both this goal that people are trying to strive for, which is good, but then also can be used as kind of like, it's kind of not necessarily addressing the rest of, you know, how the agency is structured. You know, what about all the other staff that have been, you know, at the lower tiers of the agency that have never really had the chance to move up, but then we hire this one person, or maybe like two people, and it's like, okay, you know, we've done some great work, and, you know, that's it. No, it's not it. There's lots more work to be done. And so if we viewed leadership as very tokenistic and not necessarily working towards greater equity within the organization when it comes to all forms of diversity, then that's immediately a big red flag. And to be fair, it's something that we, like all across the board, we're trying to deal with. But especially if we're trying to like assess what the agency or the organization that we're trying to be a part of, it's very critical to start asking those questions. Like I would ask them like during an interview, like, what has this process been like? You know, how does this factor into your company culture? You know, you're putting yourself in a position where you'll be working with these folks. And so you should really have like a good understanding of like, what am I really getting myself into? Because you don't want to be getting into necessarily a company culture that just kind of like has this veneer of saying that they support you, but then they don't really support you when push comes to shove.
I love the word veneer. I'm just gonna add on, because this is a really interesting topic, right? And what comes to mind is, like we all know, like during the events of like all of the Black racial motivated like killings that happened like around March, and it's always been happening, right? But then I think that was a time when a lot of companies are coming forward to say, oh, we're doing this, and this, we're doing this, and that. And I think a lot of that was probably Veneer, right? And I think like one thing that was super inspiring for me at Bain was when, and I think I should have posted this on LinkedIn, but when we posted something about Breonna Taylor, and I was like, that is inspirational because you're saying, and that's only step one, right? But at the same time, like you are putting it out there that you don't think this is right. And you're in some ways directly potentially impacting your bottom line because you have a lot of clients who may think otherwise. And like even when you read the posts or the comments underneath, you can see people who have very strong opposing opinions to like that idea. But the fact that you're willing to take a stand, and granted, not all organizations can like do that, but like take a stand that could actually impact your partnerships and your revenue. And I think that's where you're putting your money where your mouth is, essentially. So that's also part of how to tell, just actions.
Thank you all for that insight. Definitely actions should follow words and all of that. That's all really insightful and really great. So kind of in a similar vein, our next question is, can you talk about a particular moment where you might have experienced or witnessed microaggressions in the workplace and what kind of helped you navigate that experience?
I feel like it's my turn to go first, but I'm thinking.
Oh, wait, did you say you're not going first?
No, I said I'm thinking.
Oh, you're thinking, okay. Okay, well, I can go with your thinking. So fortunately, like, because I started virtually, I think I maybe have slightly less experience of like physically witnessing any acts of discrimination that I've seen so far at Citi. However, being on the global diversity and talent management team, I do a lot of D&I work naturally. And one piece of my work is also helping elevate the concerns of individual employees who may be facing some sort of structural discrimination. And so I am currently helping an employee right now who identifies as trans with an issue that we have with our global directory. So this person, the issue that arose was that in our global directory, it currently has their dead name rather than their true name. And so what I'm doing, and in this situation, the good thing is that there are people, especially within HR, that are able to help employees navigate these situations. So I'm currently working with our legal team to go through and fix the process for trans employees to be able to make sure that in our global directory, they can have their true name represented there. Because even though like it wasn't like a particular instance of discrimination that happened, there's a fear that that could happen if someone were to discover their dead name and refer to them as that. So I think that was a particular instance that at least showcased to me how there can even be structural forms of discrimination at a company.
For me, I have experiences kind of very similar to that, in that there's been some time where I've made sure that the agency knows in particular my name, but then also like my dead name does appear in some forms. And so I have to kind of recorrect specific like coworkers. It's not necessarily that they did anything malicious and that it had ill intent, but still how it affected me was still very real. And so sometimes I like correct them. And I get a change. And so normally it isn't really an issue. It's been like maybe once or twice. And so I've had to kind of just put that out there. And then also there's even one instance where, and for me particular, I am not just at the office building, but pre-pandemic, I would also be going into schools themselves because I work with young people. And so I was actually profiled when I was going to one of my schools. And so I remember I was trying to get from point A to point B to set up everything for programming, and I was checking in, and it was a different person at the front desk, and this kind of picture came up of someone else who looked completely different. came up, but she still believed that it might be me. So she checked my ID several times and was just still very confused. You know, I could clearly see that this person was not me. I could clearly see. And in my mind, while it was going on, I was just thinking, this is taking too long. I just want to set up for program because like I need to be ready to meet the young people I'm working with. Then when I get back to the office and I have a team meeting and I describe it, hadn't even really occurred to me that I basically been profiled at the school that I'm working with, you know, until I brought it up to the rest of my teammates. And how it made me feel was that I actually, this really profound, like, and really kind of like impactful thing that was like impacting me in a very negative way. It happened to me. I didn't even realize it because I was just trying to work. I was just trying to do my thing. And then it made me kind of seek out a little bit more support from my supervisor in particular, which has also been a little bit more of a complicated relationship in that she is older and white, but then also like I work in a very unique position that no one else really knows much about and can really kind of give me that kind of extra assistance that I need, particularly in the agency. And so I have to kind of both correct her, but then also I'm being supported in this way by her as she's kind of re-articulating everything that I'm saying, even this negative stuff at the same time. And so it's this very difficult and complex and very, at least still feeling weird, kind of like understanding to kind of go through and kind of process. And then, oh, yeah. And then also, I do always really try to correct different, or not necessarily, maybe kind of like being engaged in different conversations when it comes to coworkers that have said something that's kind of like, just being frank, just like off the wall. And so if we do have those moments, and particularly, especially if I'm with another coworker, and like another Black coworker, and specifically, then it's more so kind of like I hear something that's going on, and you know, I have like the time to spare. I have like the 5 to 10 minutes to spare, and so even though I might be walking over to the kitchen for lunch, I just kind of, okay, so here's how we can really address this. And so like I understand this is going on, but you know, I just kind of advocate, and I kind of like try to push myself, not like really force myself into a conversation, if especially like a coworker of color does not necessarily, is just like, does not really want me to be involved in that. They're like, okay, I got this, Maxine, like I'm good. And like, okay, I'm gonna just go on my way. But I try to be involved in these conversations. And from how we understand these kind of conversations as an agency right now is that they are still like courageous conversations, and that these are things that need to happen. If we're gonna get, like, our whole understanding is that if things are gonna get better, we have to have these difficult conversations where we kind of call out and really call in, you know, this was really messed up what you said. And this is particularly like how it's affecting like your coworkers.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. I think for me, I haven't experienced anything directly, but I think names are very powerful. And I think even like just going through Vandy and even like here, like my full name is Sumto Chukwu, so it's not a name that people attempt to pronounce. Actually, I think like 99% of all my Uber drivers start the conversation with, "Oh, what's your name? I don't want to butcher it." And I think the reason why I talk about names is because I remember we're having a whole like event on Zoom, and one of my friends who also doesn't have like an English name, so to speak, was presenting something. It was actually it was an event on just like race and just Black lives in the US, and people were like, "Oh my gosh, I thank you for sharing." But then they messed up her name, and then one person did, and everybody kept saying the same thing, but like on Zoom and chat, and like I knew it wasn't intentional, but it was like, "Hey," and so I said, "Hey, actually, it's," and spelt it out like in the chat, and like I stopped for a while. I was like, do I do that? Do I not? Because literally, like the whole office, like 500 people, like about that amount, and it was like, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry. Like this is that, this." And I think just even being super particular about like. And because so many people have done to me before, like even with emails, like it's really easy, SOMTO, but it's like Sumpto or Somtoto, and it's just like the least people can do is actually call the name the way it's supposed to be called. And like I understand that like even some other languages I can't speak, but like it's a genuine effort to try to like change it. And so yeah, I just find myself being very sensitive to that. So it's like, you know, like if I'm trying to write somebody's name that's from another language, I'm like, I better make sure I'm getting it right because I don't like how it feels. But I think it's just a really powerful thing. The other instance that comes to mind, and again, I think a lot of this, I generally believe that all human beings have good intentions. So I think as long as you tell them, like they do change. But it was, I think, during my intern summer, and we were at like a boat event. So we're all at the beach or like in the water or whatever. And I had my weave on. I wasn't gonna like the other girl who was there didn't even touch the water. But I was like, I want to be in the water. I can't even swim, but I was in the water. And so I had like the swimming cap on. And obviously I was the only person with a swimming cap on because nobody else needed it. And at first I was wearing it wrong. And so somebody was like, oh, like it's actually a way, and that was fine. And everybody was like, whatever. But there was this one particular person who just kept asking me questions over questions. And it's one thing where like I'm generally fine answering questions, but it's one thing when the questions are like I'm trying to learn versus like you're doing it wrong, and that was just like more like like I didn't realize until later, honestly. It was just like that wasn't necessary. And first is only got the firm, but it's just the whole idea that anything that pulls you out for being when you're just trying to be yourself is just like what I'd probably classify as that. But yeah, I don't think I've had any like, oh my gosh, oh no, you didn't kind of situations. but yeah.
Thank you guys so much for sharing that with us. I know like it can be really hard experiencing microaggressions in the workplace. And I think what you were saying about names is really powerful. But that kind of leads us into our next question, which I think is equally as important. And that's, how do you maintain a healthy balance between work and personal life, especially as it relates to your identity?
Okay.
That's my girl. Look. I
knew I was about to get called. Okay. I just like having time to think. Okay, so that's a question that I'm honestly still figuring out. And I think it changes. It evolves. Like my priorities have evolved so much since I started working about like a year ago. Like 2 years, almost 2 years ago. But I think it's two things. One, making sure that I have a life outside of work. Like it doesn't, like it's like, I have work and the consulting life is very busy. But just making sure that I have friends outside of work, I have a community outside of work in the Houston environment, I have a church community, I have people who I can talk to that we don't even have to talk about work at all. And I think that it's kind of interesting because when you start evolving into adulthood, I feel it's so easy to make friends like in college, right? It's like you're in the same dorm, you're walking around, and I think a lot of us have probably, as you told me that, like Maxine too, it's so hard to like really make those like real like deep like friend connections like outside of the school environment. And like a lot of my closest friends are still people who I knew from school. Because of that very reason. And I think, but that's number one. I think just making sure there's like, making sure that like my passions, like I'm very passionate about human potential, about just like, how do we make sure that people are getting to where they need to be? And it's figuring out how to, even if I have to do it over the weekend, create those spaces where I'm working with people who are actually back home in Nigeria, working to make like a difference and things like that, because that taps into who I am. And it's like a firm part of like my identity. I think another thing is also trying to make sure that my relationships at work, for those that can become a lot more personal. Like I'm just the kind of person who can't separate work from life. I'm sorry. Like I'm like super expressive. I like probably cried in front of a lot of my supervisors at this point. Like I'm just like, yeah, I'm human. Yeah, surprised much. But like honestly, like I I try to make relationships as personal as possible. I understand that not everybody can get to that level of vulnerability, but I just find that it makes for a lot more genuine conversations, a lot more, and like, if I get proven wrong that humans are inherently good, then like that, so be it. But at this point, I think people have generally been receptive to just like having much deeper conversations. I do not like small talk. I can do it pretty well, but I do not like it because it just takes away from I think how rich and how deep like conversations can be. But yeah, I think just maintaining life out of work, trying to make some work relationships like very personal, so that way I feel like I don't have to be one or the other in that space. And yeah, and a lot of the times it is going to be with like the affinity group, or like you said the diversity resource group, like that Tommy called it. I think you guys called it a different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's with them, but just engaging to like do events and stuff. But yeah, that's mine. Handing over to the next person.
Okay, I'll go. I know this is such a fun game. This happens all the time on Zoom. Is like, okay, who's gonna go? Who's gonna speak next? But I think for me, when it comes to maintaining a healthy balance between work and personal life, I think it comes down to really thinking about like what are healthy boundaries I need to set for myself, and this goes beyond identity, but it also includes your identity as well. So, like for example, I'm really big on making sure I, spend my time at work, doing what I'm supposed to do, but I also take time to like take breaks to, do what I would normally do if I were in an office. Because we're on Zoom, a lot of times it can feel like, oh, like the day is 9 to 5, but really you could start at 7 a.m. and work till like 8 p.m. and no one would really say anything. However, I think that it's so important to really, reclaim your time and say like, hey, like this is the time I'm dedicating towards work, and outside of work, I'm going to dedicate to myself and the parts of my identity that, that matter to me, or my passions, like Somto was saying. And I think having that healthy boundary between like, okay, this is my time at work, this is my time outside of work, I think is a really healthy way not only to be more productive at work, but also feel like you can bring your whole self, because, it's hard to be your whole self when, your work and your personal life is like blurring together all the time. But I think to Somto's point, I think being very open with your managers, with, your teammates, those that you work really closely with, and developing those intimate relationships, I think helps to make you feel more comfortable in the workplace, but also gives other people permission to be themselves as well. So I know like me and my manager, kind of like how Simpa mentioned, we've had a lot of heart-to-hearts, and she was honestly the first person I came out to at work, because, I didn't know coming into City like exactly how that would be received. And so I was like, let me be very open in one of my first conversations with my manager, just so that, we kind of had all of this out on the table. And from there, we've been able to like develop a really strong relationship. And I think that even if it takes a little bit of time to find that balance, and obviously like it takes maintenance throughout your time working, but I think going into it with the mindset of like, okay, this is what I want to bring to the table, this is what I will bring to the table, and this is how I'm going to make sure that I'm also practicing healthy boundaries for myself as well when it comes to work.
Child, being honest and frank, just being very honest, I guess. When after this work laptop right here will close, and that is it. I have a set time where I do not respond to emails. I still have it on my phone, but they're not that important. I just read and I just swipe it away. Swipe it away. But once that hat is off, once that work hat is off, it does not come back on unless there is a big emergency. And it has to be like blaring, like it's like some attention needs to be done. Like unless it is like a giant emergency, will this work laptop come back up again? And then for me, it's especially difficult being around and like being in just the general like queer community around, and then also being someone that kind of has to maneuver through different spaces, because I am someone that provides a specific service for young queer people, and then people kind of look at that and latch onto that. And so oftentimes we have to also like work with different funders from different like employer resource groups, things like organizations of that nature. So we have to like maneuver just in the community, just on the day-to-day as like a person, but then also knowing that we have to maneuver through these different spaces like professionally as well. And so sometimes there's kind of more so like, well, I just want to be a person. I just want to be a person doing this thing. If I'm at this King Princess concert, I'm not the program specialist right now. I am just Maxine. I am at this concert. I am just trying to just live like a normal, just like 24-year-old life. Like that is just what I'm trying to do. And I have to really watch out for those specific boundaries. Kind of like, yes, I understand that even when it comes to like working with like other folks that might just be volunteering with the agency, it's more so like, okay, yes, we do this kind of work technically together, but that does not necessarily mean that we can be best friends out in real life, for sure. We just have to kind of like, we maneuver these boundaries and we try our best to kind of, I might not run away from you, but I'm not necessarily going to try to be your best friend, because there's still a work relationship here, and I need that separation. Like I just have to have that. And also I have been described as a little bit more of a social butterfly. I don't necessarily see it that way all the time, but I do give some validity to it. And I try to really be involved with, especially the coworkers, a little bit at my level or like above, like within the organization, and trying to, learn more from what they're doing and trying to like see if there's a way, if I have time and energy to help them out, then I am so happy to do that. And really, at one point, we even made up our own group me of people that are at this level and at this age range just within the organization. And so we were just kind of, trying to work together and really trying to work to these goals, but then also still able to talk about things that are happening at work and kind of process that, without just like being frank with each other, because there's not always that kind of space where you feel like you can do that, and saying like, this happened, and, I don't understand why they did this, what's going on with this, and this, and just kind of being able to debrief. Then also still kind of saying, well, like, okay, we can still be kind of friends-ish. We don't have to be all the way there, but, we can still have a great time together. We work together. We can have a nice relationship, but, we still don't have to be best friends like all day, every day. We might hang out, we might do a picnic maybe once or twice, but we don't have to be best friends. You can have other friends, and that is entirely fine. But, we're still trying to like keep it open, still keep it professional, but then also still be for each other in the ways that we all need to.
One quick point that I want to follow up on, just talking about like reclaiming our time and healthy boundaries, and like understanding that, when you're at work, and when you're not, you're not. That was something that was a little jarring to me, I think, coming from Vanderbilt. Just because working as an RA on campus, you're expected to be on more or less all the time. So getting, someone knocking at your door at 3 a.m. means you're on the clock at 3 a.m., even though you're not paid hourly. So I think it is important, especially for Vanderbilt students, to recognize that, like, like your time is important, and like, understanding what healthy boundaries are for you, and like how you can spend time doing things you love that are outside of your orgs or your classes, I think is really important. And start practicing that now, please.
Thank you for that.
Can I have one more point?
I just want to get to the last question because we're running on time. The last question is, do you all have any words of wisdom or advice for a college student preparing to enter the job market based on current trends?
And Maxine, feel free to throw in your final thought with that answer if you'd like to.
I know I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I think one piece of advice I would say is to actually do the reaching out and networking, even if it's just for informational purposes, because sometimes you can learn a lot through these really even informal networking calls. Because I don't really think I understood that as a first or second year student, really even as a junior, until I started doing these calls and I started learning a lot more about the companies I was applying to, rather than just kind of doing these blanket applications. And I think having that better understanding, I think, set me up to be able to look at companies with a lot of different lenses that I didn't have before. And so that would be one piece of what I recommend. I think the second piece I would recommend, especially when it comes to understanding talent, diversity, inclusion, equity, all of that at companies, is to look up companies. They're usually called talent and diversity reports. Sometimes nonprofits might just do like a yearly report, but I recommend looking at that for any company you're thinking of applying to, because a lot of times it'll give you some really interesting insight into the actual work that company is doing to make progress in the DEI space.
I want to go ahead and, well, first I want to add that little point in from earlier. So especially for like folks in the that want to be in the nonprofit sector, and when it come into terms of that work-life balance, we understand you care, but don't let it drive all of your life, because you will get burnt out and it will become horrible, absolutely horrible. No one comes to the nonprofit sector thinking like, okay, I'm gonna be rich. No, you don't do that. That doesn't happen. That's not how that works. But you only get paid a certain amount. And so don't drive yourself down to the bone. It's just like everybody understands, like you understand that you love what you do, like you love doing the work, but there still has to be a point when you stop and rest for your own sake. You just have to. And then going into like trying to break more so into that more so as an industry, I would say really, if you have time and you can really intern still or like network really, like I think that's just like such a great way to start getting into, and especially if you know like something like you want to do, or if you know someone in town you might want to work with, you say, okay, I have such and such skill, so can I help you? And then I kind of want to bring back something from earlier and saying like, really affirm yourself of your own skills. Like you don't have to like say, you don't have to have like, have gone to NASA already and like done all those kinds of things, but you have skills. And so don't be afraid to talk about those. Like you have so much talent, like everybody, like all of y'all students just like have so much talent, and just like, you could just have a little bit of like faith in it, although it feels hard, but having some faith in it and really being able to like explicitly tie it to what you've currently got going on, or what you're applying for, or what you're thinking about applying for, or even if you're trying to network and say, I'm trying to build this skill, like really, really stick to it and like dig your feet in and just like have some gusto with it and say like, I'm trying to do this, I will do this, more so kind of like that. Yeah, that's kind of what I've got right now.
All right, so I guess for me, I would say first I would do what Maxine did, and sometimes just add one thing. Sometimes you put an actual physical boundary. I got this like room divider, so this is my desk, and then that's my bedroom area, because I'm like, I don't want the ambience from like work in there. But anyways, as far as advice, I really echo what Maxine said in sense of, honestly, affirm your skills. It's really just like knowing you, like what makes you stand out. What is your special sauce? And you can't tell me there's nothing. Like there is something that makes each person different. There's a potential that each person is trying to get to, and it will help in everything. Like even your resume, it's like, does my resume tell a story? Does it tell the story of like who I am? Like your interviews, it's like, if you don't know why you want you, so why should somebody else know why they want you? And so it's just figuring out like, how am I different? What am I bringing to the table? Even the things that you could imagine or seem like weaknesses or whatever, they are strengths. And even just affirming that confidence too. Like when I first started at Vane, I'd see a slide that someone else made, I'm like, oh my God, like that person is clearly so far above where I am. today I see a slide, I'm like, if you gave me that slide, I would make it. And like and sometimes like I still like fall back, like, and I'm like, oh shoot, would I? But I have to believe, and I do believe that like I would probably do an even better job. Might not look exactly the same way. It will probably be different because I have my own, again, sauce, but like everybody else does. But at the same time, like I will do a good job. And so it's just really knowing that about yourself and really affirming that, because no one else can take that away from you. And so I think that's my key thing. And like when you are, like, to Tommy and Maxine's point, like networking and talking to people, really asking what systems are in place. Systems are very important. It's not just like, are there good people? Like if there are bad systems, there will be bad people. So it's like, oh, people will get away with whatever they want to do. So like, what systems exist to make sure that on the day-to-day, not just like at a high level, that my work and my identity is like protected, and that I can actually report any microaggressions to some system that will not then hold me accountable. But yeah, that's mine.
Well, thank you guys so much for providing that insight, and also for taking time out of your busy schedules and what I'm going to probably assume is some personal time to come spend and talk with us. We really do appreciate it. For all the students on Zoom, feel free to connect with Sumto and Tommy via LinkedIn, and Maxine will be dropping her email in the chat if you guys would like. But yeah, if we could all just like come off mute real quick and say thank you to our panelists, I would really appreciate it.
Yay, thank you.
Thank you all.
That was fantastic. And I also want to give a thank you to Morgan and Maddie doing a fantastic job moderating, to everyone involved. This is probably one of the best, if not the best, career center program I've had the privilege to be a part of. So